Welcome to this February webinar. I consider this one, I guess I consider all of them very special, but this one I consider really special for a special reason. And we call it We Don't Ever Need to Accept Illness. And the reason I think it's special is that this one has so much to do with my dharma as a healer. Most of you know I was a medical doctor, was my regular career. I was actually a pediatrician and took care of many hundreds of babies. And then I still continued to practice medicine, but I joined the Marshall University faculty. And so I did a lot of teaching um, as well as clinical work. And and then evolved my dharma as a healer by learning Ayurvedic approaches to diagnosis and treatment, and that I thought was just a terrific extension of my abilities as a physician, because physicians are trained and have tools to deal with very superficial levels of illness, expressed values of illness in the physiology. And Ayurveda gave me an insight into something much more subtle, the governing intelligence of the body, those energies that run the body, which in Ayurveda are known as Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, and how they function and how they organize in the body. And I was able to do a lot of that assessment through pulse diagnosis, just by placing 3 fingers on the radial artery at the wrist and feeling what was going on in the artery and hence in the body. And I had a lot of very good training from many very excellent Indian physicians of Ayurveda. They're known as Vaidyas. And so that was a big step in my development as a healer and as a clinician. Um, but then something, what I would call even more spectacular, happened. I spent many years meditating, many, many hours a day, and developed some more subtle perception, the use of what they call the subtle senses, and was able to see people's energies. And particularly, I think if I have a talent, it was to tune into the emotional energies that were underlying and causing and sustaining illnesses in people. And so I can now combine everything I know. Well, I can't practice medicine, but because I retired from the practice of medicine, but and that's a formal thing. I don't have a license anymore. But I incorporate knowledge of medicine, the physiology, the gross level of the body, along with Ayurvedic assessment, and then also with energy assessment. And I've learned so many things about how we get sick, why we get sick, how we get well, and why we don't get well, and what keeps us in a mode. And I've had a number of experiences recently, and I want to tell you about those tonight, that I thought gave me some very deep lessons about illness and about the opportunities to learn and grow and truly be well, that are contained within an illness or any problem that shows up. I even referenced today a book called The Healer's Handbook, which is it's about an inch thick, 8.5 by 11 paper. Looks like it was mimeographed, but it was actually printed with a laser printer, I believe. And the Healer's Handbook is nothing but a list of conditions, physical conditions. Some of them are diagnoses, but most of them are just the actual physical conditions and the emotional underpinnings of those conditions, the things that one might know. And some of you may have experienced, I may have pulled the book out when you had a problem and said, let's just see what the book says about why you might have this condition. And sometimes there's one statement, sometimes there's 2 or 3 statements. I think 1 or 2 of them even have 4 as to different emotional conditions that could produce, I should say, different emotional states that could produce specific physical conditions. It's a fascinating book. It's a fascinating idea, I think. at least to me as a healer, and very much a part of my dharma as a healer, to be able to connect the gross physical illness with something going on inside. And as most of you know, I do most of that intuitively. I don't need the book very often, but sometimes I'm kind of left wondering. I don't get a clear sense from working with somebody because something may be blocking my access to that information. And so I'll go to the book and I'll even read it out to the client because that helps them to see what it is that's what's driving that. And sometimes we even figure out what's blocking me from being aware of it, giving me the access to it, but also blocking them from getting well. And as we're going to see tonight, that's a very big part of it. So one of the people I've been working with for some time has cancer, and I've always liked working on serious illnesses, autoimmune disorders, and the like, and cancer and um, degenerative conditions and things like that. Um, and in working with this client, one of the things I've discovered um, is that there are these, you might say, layers, and I've used that description many times with people. It's like there's layers of information, and you keep whole psychology, the whole sense of being that you just can't overcome it. So when I use the title, "We Don't Ever Need to Accept Illness," that's true, but there are exceptions to whether or not we're actually going to get well. And things like chronic problems, especially structural ones, are often very slow to respond if they respond at all. Um, and um, they just may not be amenable to being well, even if we do all the work. Even if we do all the work, and that's just because they're on the gross physical level in a very, you might say, a rigid way. Um, Other exceptions to who isn't going to get well, or who will get, who could be well, doesn't need to be ill. It's when there is karma that is very rapidly, or it's very intensely unfolding, and sometimes that just happens with too much energy. That karma to overcome that. With just my work. Now that means, when I say just my work, we can include modern medical care in that, but we can also include, Vedic technologies like yoga, which are extremely effective. And then there's some other Vedic technologies which are not dissimilar, but yagas are a particular kind. And they can be very powerful. And so I've seen people who are in intensive care and basically were dying, have their condition turned around by yagas. So I certainly encourage people, if they're in situations where their karma is very heavy, and their life is basically in jeopardy, that they try to get a yaga or set of yagas done to change that course. But from my side, I also can contribute to facilitating the transformation, both by working on the actual problem, on that, you might say, on that grosser level, but it's energetically working on it, as well as working on the causative energies that may underlie that. But serious illnesses like cancer and autoimmune diseases can be eliminated. Um, and the way we go about that is to peel off all those layers. I think onion again, like peeling off the layers of an onion. It doesn't smell very good. It's kind of hard on the eyes, but you know what I'm saying. From this on the silent level, I'm not doing this out loud. Finding different things, different components of this, until we get down to a component that I think is really fascinating. It's one of the things I learned in working with this client I was describing with the cancer. We got rid of all the energy that was producing the disease. And he was clinically doing very well. But I felt like we ran into a block, and eventually I was able to peel that one open also. And what I discovered was that there was a certain need to be ill. There was a different karma. Part of that was sympathy. Part of that was a need for sympathy. Part of that was feeling sorry for himself. Uh, Part of that was a long history of playing the victim or the weakling or the one who couldn't make things happen because other people had more power. Um, and so there was a lot of that in there. And um, it took a little while to get that cleared up, but we got that even that cleared up. And so at this point, I'm very hopeful that the clinical course will proceed smoothly now. Though there's sometimes bumps, even when we do a good job. Sometimes things happen, and then which are karmic playing out of the karma, and then we go back and we clean those up, and then, or sometimes they just clean themselves up because sometimes they're like a karmic hiccup, just a momentary thing that happens where some symptoms will crop up, and then you check it, and it's really okay. I chose the words in the title of this webinar very carefully. And I have a feeling that while they make sense on a superficial level, if you actually thought about what I wrote, you'd think like, that was kind of a strange way to say that. Well, it's strange because I picked certain words, and the words I picked, the whole thing reads, "We don't ever need to accept illness." So the word "we," of course, means all of us. It's a collective pronoun. Though some people use it and who are some individuals use it to describe themselves when they say name your pronouns. My pronouns are me, my, and mine, just in case you're wondering. I don't usually say that, but think about that for a while. No, don't think about it. Anyway, so the we is the collectiveness. All of us individually and collectively together don't need to accept illness, don't ever need to accept illness. The word ever means ever, obviously, but it means that not sometimes, but always. Not sometimes we don't need to accept illness. We don't ever need to accept illness. It's an always thing, but it still comes to us sometimes. We still sometimes get sick. But when we do, then we can look at that. I'm sick. What do I need to do on the gross level? In terms of medicating and treating the body in whatever ways, on the Ayurvedic level and so on and so forth. But on the more subtle level, what do I need to do to organize my energies to get well? Dealing with perhaps the cause of the illness, dealing with any resistance to getting well, any need not to be well. That's a really good one, always. And to find who I am as a well person, and then look at my not well state and go, I don't need to be that way. I don't have to be like that. I can be this well person that I normally am. Different ways of approaching it like that give us that ability to never, ever need to accept illness. So the next word, and it's a really, well, let's start with the last word. I'm going to go to the end of the sentence. Illness. Illness is a state of unwellness, things, physiology not functioning correctly, possibly because of some infectious agent, some injury, some deterioration of the system that has occurred. Um, People get strokes all too often, and lost a couple of friends in the last months from strokes. But when a person has a stroke, if I can get to work on it in the first literally hours or days, but not weeks, right? Soon, right away, often can help reverse that tendency. And I did work with one person. I didn't get to start on them until they were, I think, a couple of weeks or more into their illness. No, it was even more than that because they were already out of the hospital and in rehab. And I started working on them in rehab. And when they went into rehab, at that point, they literally could only put two words together and had a very difficult time expressing themselves. And within 8 days, they could talk pretty well and ask for what they need, have their needs, express their needs, and what, and carry on something of a conversation. And I worked on that person for quite a while and got almost everything back. And fortunately, the rest of it time took care of. Um, but it was slow, but they did get everything back, and they talk perfectly normally now. If you were to see them, you'd never know that. Uh, I'm sorry, they didn't have a stroke. It wasn't a stroke. It was an infection in the brain that had produced that problem. And it was quite devastating. It was really, really devastating. But they did very well. And part of that is good brain plasticity, and part of that was, having some real subtle assistance with that. So the other thing that really drove this all home to me, and it was a very personal experience, because essentially a month ago, 6 weeks, 5 weeks ago, on the night of January 1st, I came down with a respiratory infection, and I had a dry cough and fever and terrible aches and pains. And the aches and pains lasted a couple of days. Um, and then all I had was a cough and amazing amount of fatigue. I was really surprised at how much fatigue there was, how tired I felt. And I wasn't ill anymore, but I was tired. I would do things and I'd go like, whew, that was exhausting. I better go lie down. It was that bad. And so I could get very little done. And that lasted for about 2.5 or 3 weeks. No, about 2.5 weeks. The cough lasted about 3 weeks, a few days longer. And after about a week, when I was coughing and weak, feeling fatigue, but long past when the fever had gone and the body aches had gone, um, someone I had been in association with had gotten tested for COVID-19 and was positive. And so I thought, boy, this didn't seem to me like it was anything like what people describe, but I'll go, I'll go get tested. So I got tested, and of course, it was 4 days later. 4 days after, well, on the fifth day, 4 days after I got tested, that the results came back positive, which really, in a sense, surprised me. I wasn't surprised because I knew the other person I'd been close to had it, um, and their symptoms and some other people's symptoms that were in our bubble, our social bubble, had even more striking symptoms that were more obviously COVID. But I really wasn't sure at all that I had COVID, but I did. Now, the thing that's important about this story, that was the history, the story of it, was that as soon as I recognized that I was getting ill, I started working on myself. And I mostly did energy work. I didn't really use that much in the way of Ayurvedic preparations or any kind of modern medicine. And what I found um, was that I could get to that very quickly, and figure out where the energies were disturbed, and get them straightened out. And that, I have some pretty powerful techniques for that, and that went really well. And it was very, very important lesson for me that as soon as I start to feel ill, to go to work on myself. Don't put it off. Don't pretend that we're not sick. I tend to do that. It's like, nah, it'll be okay. Um, and, not assume that I'm just going to get better and I'll just ride it out. And that is another one of the lessons I really want to get across tonight, because people come and talk to me sometimes weeks or months. Oh, I was so sick. I had this, or I had that. And I go like, why didn't you call me? Why did you suffer for a week or 10 days? If you'd called me on the second or third day when you felt really bad, you know, we could have got it straightened out. So in a couple of days later, you'd have been okay. So that was the lesson I took away from the acute part of this illness. Um, was to not put off working on myself. Now, I had been working on myself for other things, minor stuff, for a long time, and um, I only mention that because when I started doing this energy work, I actually didn't work on myself ever. And it didn't seem to be necessary. It felt, but I also didn't have a clear sense of how to do that on myself. Whereas now I can do it on myself, and I'm very comfortable with that. So it was a little like learning distant healing, Of course, everything I do is distant healing. Um, but when I was first learning how to do that, it's like, do I trust what I'm picking up about somebody who's, across town or in another state or in another country or another continent? And I gradually learned to trust that, and so I can work on anybody anywhere at any time. um, so working on myself, I had to go through that same process of becoming coming to trust that what I was experiencing was really me, and that I could work on that as if it was somebody else. Have that detached feeling of, oh, this needs some attention. So I just put my attention on it and use the tricks that I have, thousands of them, to make things better. Now, you remember my story of being ill was that the cough and the fatigue persisted. And so as I got into entering the third week of it after 2 weeks, and I was coughing, and I wasn't really coughing a lot. I only coughed mostly when I tried to do something vigorous or was outdoors in the cold air, breathing the cold air. Um, and the fatigue faded pretty much so that it wasn't such a problem. I was sleeping more at night, which was kind of nice. I actually kind of enjoyed that. But I was sleeping more, but it wasn't overwhelming fatigue. Like I had to, every time I tried to do something or finish doing something, I go like, I got to go lay down. It wasn't like that. And then I went, wait a minute. Why am I just accepting this situation? What is it that's going on? And so I had to look at myself, and it kind of surprised me, but there was a certain feeling sorry for myselfness that was going on. Is there such a word? Sorry for yourselfness? That kind of quality of, that was going on. And I just went like, okay, what's that about? And when I got into that, then that went away. And then the fatigue was completely gone and the cough quickly disappeared. So there was that late phase part of it that needed attention. And so I went and put attention on that and took care of it. Now I could have taken care of it earlier, but as I said, I was wrapped up in it and just kind of accepting it. And so often we just accept. Oh, I'll get through this. It'll take a few days, but I'll get through this. It's no big deal. So we don't think about it that way. We don't think of, no, this isn't necessary. We don't need to accept this. So that's the next word I want to talk about, is that acceptance of the fact that we're ill. We don't need to accept that. So that's how that strange word got into the sentence. We could say we don't need to accept illness. I'm sorry, we don't need illness, but we don't need to accept illness. And if we find ourselves accepting it, well, we could work on that. That is something we can work on and make it better. So if you get ill, if the prevention strategies that you employ, and I do hope you do, eating right and getting plenty of rest, exercise, meditation, of course, and some purification, which can mean some fasting every once in a while for a day or two. Not long, just if you do it regularly. It's not necessary to do it very often. And if you really eat well and have good digestion, like a Pitta like me, then you don't need that quite as often. But anyway, so diet, exercise, rest, stress management, that was the meditation, and purification are the 5 pillars of maintaining health. But, karma being what it is, and sometimes things happen. And so we feel some need to be ill, but we don't have to. So we're going to talk now about that need. It's that underlying requirement is a good word for it. The requiring something because it feels important to us or it feels essential to us. And we may not be consciously aware of it. In fact, most of the time, we're really not consciously aware of it. But we're feeling that quality of needing something. Again, feeling sorry for yourself is a good reason to be sick. But there are many other reasons. So rooting all of that out, rooting all of those energies out that are produced in illness and keep us from regaining good health. That is the core of what we try to do, what I try to do in my work with clients. And that takes a commitment. I have the commitment. That's my dharma as a healer. I am committed to people being well. And I'm ferocious about that to some degree. And sometimes I give people a really hard time when I, try to gently move them out of, I need to be ill, be ill. I feel sorry for myself. I need to play that dependent role. Because I need love and I need caring and I need nurturance and I need people, to think of me as important to them and show me that by caring for me when I'm ill. So we can go through, see, these are all reasons why people get sick. Um, so I have that commitment, and it's a very powerful commitment in me. And I think anybody who's worked with me knows that. Um, but not everybody does. Not everybody feels a commitment to be well. And so if you're not feeling that, then you need to, well, it'd be good if you, good for your health, if you were to look at that, but it can be hard to do if you really need to be ill. You have that a strong need. It's a strong requirement. I love that word. I looked it up in the dictionary. As a part of the definition, it's a requirement for something. You feel a great, we use the word need for something. And so if that's there, certainly taking a look at that can be very, very valuable. So you can free yourself of this burden, this karma. You learn the lessons of the illness, what the lessons that the illness is trying to teach you, or to give you, you might say, or to give you the opportunity to learn and to master so that you can feel comfortable. Excuse me, I've been talking for quite a while. I'm going to take a little sip and conclude by saying I hope that all of this discussion has inspired you to commit to being well, to staying well, and to going to work on yourself, maybe with my help or other people's help, but to going to work on yourself whenever you feel unwell in any way, at the first sign of unwellness, to say, oh, something's going on and it's calling my attention. And before it screams at me, if it's just a little message, I will deal with it at that level and go to work on it. But having the attitude, no, I'll get through this, maybe, maybe you'll get through it, is not always helpful. And it requires that you wander in misery for a while before you regain your usual state of wellness. And if you have not a usual state of wellness, well, isn't that a pretty strong motivation? Remember that word accept that I put in the title? Why accept it? Let's change it. It may take some work, but we can do it. It won't be painful. It's when I say work means attention. And attention doesn't really involve, any work. Um, but sometimes we have to give ourselves a little nudge and say, why am I accepting this? Why am I complaining about being sick, whatever the sickness is, unwell? Why am I complaining about it and not doing anything really to make myself well? Not making that commitment to myself. Okay, so um, that's what I have to say. I am going to